Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by RE/MAX St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose RE/MAX.
Hello, my name is Andrew Faas, and welcome to Following the Golden Rule.
And I'm your co-host, Jay Remer, and I will be joining Andy throughout this series where we will be discussing the ABCs of building character. We invite your comments and questions on the Charlotte County Television Facebook page as well as the YouTube channel where this will be posted. Now, based on the feedback that we got from last week's show, it really revolved around the question, does character matter? But before we get into this week's topic of courageous, I'm wondering why you picked courageous and not compassion, because especially right now, the world seems to be hungry for compassion. So I just would like your thoughts on that, and then we'll get right into it.
Well, I did consider compassion, and it is certainly an important characteristic. The reason I chose courage is it's much more of a tangible characteristic that people are actually looking for in terms of solutions to the problems that we have faced and are facing. And compassion does connotate feeling sorry or even pitying people with respect to what they go through. Mm-hmm. And the school shootings over the last few years, one of the common things people said afterwards, we don't want your prayers and thoughts anymore. Mm-hmm. We want tangible action.
They want action. Yeah, I've noticed actually that compassion, which I've studied quite a lot, it's sort of a difficult term to put definition on, and people often misunderstand its meaning. And I think courageous is something that's a much more familiar word. And so from your perspective, why does being courageous matter?
Well, I think courageous is, not I think, I know courageous is something that is very easy to talk about, yet very difficult to actually do. And when we ask people to think about how they rank themselves on character and on being courageous, I encourage people to look at it in terms of what could I have done differently to avoid something horrible from happening? Mm-hmm. And all of us throughout our life are either bullies and or bystanders and or targets and or victims. And there's a sad statistic that I use quite often, and that is 3/4 of North American workers do not feel that they can count on their co-worker for support when things go bad. Mm-hmm. And that comes from a study of over 20,000 Americans that my foundation, the Faas Foundation, and Mental Health America conducted over a 4-year period. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the saddest statistics that I've encountered. But again, being courageous matters, and particularly today, when we are going through some unprecedented times.
Mm-hmm. I think in this series we want to be careful not to have people compare themselves to one another, but oftentimes working together in this collaborative way that you've been mentioning is helpful. And I think summoning up courage is one of those qualities that benefits from encouraging one another. Have you found that to be the case in organizations?
Well, actually, no. And collective action is a good way for people to become engaged and to become resistors, defenders, and protectors. And if we look at the last couple of decades and all of the corporate wrongdoings and abuse and with the Me Too and the corruption that exists, that gets exposed, there's a common situation, and that is that these things have been going on in these institutions for years, and in many cases decades. And the question I always ask is, well, why didn't somebody put their hand up and say, this is wrong? And the reason that people didn't put their hand up, in command control environments, people are afraid. And where people have done that, they've been retaliated against. So getting back to the collective action, why is it that people did not form a collective effort to put a stop to things that they knew were wrong? And part of the answer to it is a quote that I'll give from Martin Niemöller's. And it's particularly relevant today because we are going through a shift. And we will be called on to make choices relative to do we support a more collective socio-economic model, or do we want to continue being conditioned and working in dictatorial environments? So the quote, and I quote, "First they came for the communist, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for me, but there was no one left to speak out for me." And when you look at the statistic I gave, 3/4 of people, of American workers, cannot count on their supervisor for support when they need it. So I think people need to ask themselves, and following the golden rule, if I were targeted and then I became a victim, who can I count on for support?
Right.
And then ask yourself the question, when you see something happening that affects people in a negative way, can they count on me to put my hand up and say, wait a minute, this is wrong? And that's something that I'm trying to encourage. And by doing that, you are being compassionate.
Yeah, that's true. There's no question about that. I think compassion is something that is going to be, you know, a common thread through this entire thing, because it's good. It's a requirement for any kind of reformation, and so this collaborative work, I think, is very important. So the question then comes is to, you know, why is it that getting people to rally behind you in time of need, why is it that it's such a problem? Is it because they've just been experienced so much negative input trying that in the past, or is it because they're unfamiliar with how to behave? Did they not learn this as children? What is where do you think the rub is? Because so many people don't do it. We have so many bystanders. I'm just wondering, how can we make that shift?
Well, to make that shift is recognizing that we are products of environment, our environment. So as with most of the characteristics that we're going to go through, it starts at the home. It starts with the parent, through to the teacher, through to who you work for, through to who leads the various units that you're involved in. And when I say people become products of their environment, it's good and bad. So there is another quote I'll use that kind of answers it, and because you know we don't want to have people go around calling each other cowards,
right?
And putting your hand up is a very difficult and can be a dangerous thing. And there's a study done by Stanley Milgram from Yale University right after the Second World War. And he said, ordinary people simply doing their jobs without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terrible destructive process. Moreover, even when the destructive effects of their work become patently clear, and when they are asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the resources needed to resist authority. And that comes from his Perils of Obedience, a study that he did post-war. And I would suggest that a resource that people can learn is character building. So we certainly don't suggest that people we certainly don't suggest that people act foolishly, but follow a bit of history in terms of the resistance movements that have taken place in various countries, and how they have, and in most cases they are coordinated efforts. But again, everybody, as they go through life, when they see somebody being bullied, or they see somebody being untreated fairly, or being treated unfairly, or they see other wrongdoings, understanding and thinking, how would I like to be in that situation where nobody kind of stood up for me?
You know, it's interesting. The thought that comes to mind is the current Black Lives Matter protests that are going on, and in my memory, I don't recall a time when as many people around the globe united on a single front on any matter. And I'm wondering whether or not this is an example of courage, and whether or not this amount of courage is pushing us to a tipping point where we may actually, this Reformation has a shot.
Well, I'm not going to say that yet. You know, I think the Black Lives Movement is important, and it has been very diversified. But the responses to it have been much of the same rhetoric, and we need some pretty concrete action. I think we need to look at the protests as a way that people can express themselves. And I think when I talk being courageous, I'm talking about people individually making the decision, I'm going to do something that will have a tangible effect.
So you're really looking at the leadership to take action and not just a bunch of words.
No, I'm talking about the individual.
Uh-huh.
And again, I'll rely on what others have said about it.
Uh-huh.
Because I couldn't say this kind of thing. I could say it a different way, but it's more powerful coming from somebody who actually has made a difference in the world, Mahatma Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
It is possible for a single individual to defy the whole might of an evil empire to save his honor, his religion, his soul, and lay the foundation for that empire's fall or its regeneration.
Mm-hmm.
So, I talked a little earlier about this is something that we can start developing at a very early stage of our life.
What do you consider the greatest barriers to courage?
Well, the biggest barrier is, again, an individual barrier. The courage is not something that is really taught well in schools.
Mm-hmm.
And we are taught to be empathetic. We're thought to be mindful. We're taught to be compassionate. But there are certain things that we've got to fight for.
Yes.
And we're really not taught to fight. And we're conditioned to suppress our emotions. And so when I say we're conditioned and in some cases not allowed,
mm-hmm.
So how often do people hear the expression, leave your emotions at the door?
That's right.
And if somebody is frustrated or outraged at what is happening, and they do not feel that they can express that outrage, it is suppression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's why I gave the quote in terms of what Martin Niemheimer
mm-hmm.
indicated.
Yeah.
It becomes a bit of subconscious to say, well, I can't, what can I do about it?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how you say, how you're kind of implying that being courageous is a little bit, it's not quite so easy as, say, being believable or authentic, where it's perhaps a little bit more cut and dried. And because we are taught as kids not to lie and to do certain things certain ways. So wondering how...
Well, it not as easy, but it is easier not to put your hand up.
Yes.
And in terms of importance, I think being courageous is one of the most important characteristics that we're going to be talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the others are important,
mm-hmm.
and some, quite frankly, are essential.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to create an environment where there is collaboration, people should, and people are going to be included. The expectations that we must have from people is is for people to participate
mm-hmm.
and become engaged. And becoming engaged is not coming in happily and giving their input and walking away. It's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming and saying, I'm going to promote something I believe in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to protect. I'm going to defend. I'm going to resist if necessary. And the inability for people to speak truth to power has gotten us into where we are today.
Yeah.
And power needs to be spoken to, and leaders need to hear how people feel and why they feel they do. And that is outside of a lot of people's comfort zone.
That's it, yeah. That's it.
And so we have to make it part of a person's comfort zone.
That's right. And so how do you go about doing that? Do you just encourage them, or?
Well, this is where when we go through the various conditions or characteristics, this is where they all interrelate.
Yeah.
Want to be honest on this. What we are asking people to do is dangerous, and people who've done it in the past have met with resistance and met with retaliation, and I think people are called on, and they need to instantly do something and be courageous about it. There are other instances where you can reflect on it and say, you know, I heard a derogatory comment by the CEO, and I want to challenge that. Well, I would not encourage anybody to put their hand up in the meeting and say to the CEO that was uncalled for. But I would encourage the individual to go to the CEO afterwards and say, you may want to not make comments like that. They are offensive. Yeah. They're offensive to either me or to others that it was directed to. Yeah. So it's not being stupid about it. Right. And getting back to the collective action, you can, people can and should take collective action beyond just the vocal. They need to strategize and say, okay, this is something that is bad for the organization and the people in it, and for our other stakeholders. How can we bring this forward to put a stop to it, right, or change it? Yeah.
Well, I think that that's, you know, that is, given the small window of opportunity that we have here, taking that kind of action is critical. And having the ability to do that is where we're looking to leaders to do it.
And looking for leaders to do it, everybody can be a leader here. So, you know, our audience is a broad audience. Our audience are the majority who are bystanders. Yes. And what we encourage is people go from being bystanders to being those resistors, defenders, protectors. And unfortunately, some of those choices are fraught with danger. Yes. But if we look back again at history, if we didn't have the resistance movement in the German-occupied countries, we could have the course of history could have been so much different. Yeah. And unfortunately, we are reliving that. Yeah. And it was less than 10% of the population, way less than 10% of the population then.
That's amazing.
And but it does show the power of collective actions.
So The kinds of questions that we want to ask people of themselves, again, is we want to focus on reflection, and to take the time to reflect on yourself, and if you feel that you are courageous, and why, and how do you find people that you hold in high regard as far as courage goes? Do you find them courageous? And again, why is that? And I think that's part of the self-reflection. And then, of course, do people think I'm courageous? And why would they think that? Is there a solid example? And I think that that's the message that we want to carry through this series.
Yeah. And look at it, you know, in real terms, because all of us have been in situations where we regret not putting our hand up and putting a stop to it, whether it was a school bully, or whether it was a abusive boss, or whether it was out-and-out corruption, on systemic corruption in the organization. And you know, I say to people, think about, you know, could I have avoided something from happening? Could I have avoided the bankruptcy of my company? Could I have avoided somebody's career going down the ditch? Could I have avoided somebody's suicide? And these are some pretty hard questions.
Yeah.
And they are real situations that people have experienced.
That's right.
And so it's one that is you know, a tough.
It's a tough one.
Tough discussion, or thinking through, that people have to do.
But one of the nice things about self-reflection is you can do it whenever you want to in private, and you can really examine, you know, you could really go face to face almost in the mirror with, how am I doing? And that, I think, gets people engaged in their own lives much more. And I think that that's really part of what we're trying to achieve here.
Yes.
So thank you, Andy. I think this has been a great discussion.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today in C is for Courage. We invite you to leave your questions and comments on the Charlotte County Television Facebook page and on the YouTube channel, where this will be reposted. And we look forward to seeing you next week, when we will be dealing with D is for Dependable.
Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.